So today's subject is Vedic Way of Life. You know, our organization is called Vedanta Society. Vedanta itself means the essence, the gist, or the final word or conclusion of knowledge. That's the real meaning of Vedanta. It comes from the word Veda, and Veda itself has got a special significance. Historically, you'll be surprised to know the language in which I am speaking now in front of you is closer to the language of the Vedas than many of the languages spoken in India today. It may be a revelation to many of us, those who have not studied philology or comparative linguistics or the science of languages. The language that I'm speaking to you right now in front of you, the English language, along with German, Latin, Greek, and many of the languages spoken in European continents, are closer to the language in which Vedas were written or Vedas were recorded than many of the Indian languages of our times. They all belong to the Indo-Germanic or Indo-Iranian or the Aryan family of languages. The word Aryan, that also needs a lot of explanation, especially in the context of what happened during the Second World War. If you read Hitler's Mein Kampf, there also you come across the word Aryan. And in Vedas also you come across the same word Aryan. So I don't think anything more is required to create a total confusion and anarchy in the minds of people who don't know philology, history, and philosophy. The word Arya, as it is pronounced in Sanskrit, literally means a person who is noble, broad-minded, cultured, refined, and a person who can look at things from the other man's point of view or other woman's point of view, to be closer to the American concept of values. That's the real meaning of Arya. Why I'm stressing this point, when anybody talks about Vedas, you can't help mentioning the word Arya in Sanskrit, which in its anglicized form is Aryan, because that word was completely distorted and terribly misinterpreted, mostly after the Prusso-French War, in which the Germans defeated the French, and that was the beginning of the consolidation of the Germanic peoples under Bismarck. From that time onwards, Bismarck needed some kind of an external symbol to mobilize and unify the Germanic-speaking peoples of Europe. For that, this word was terribly distorted, and he got a little help from many of the German Indologists of 19th century, like Max Muller and others. Now, remember, the word Arya in Sanskrit, as I said earlier, has nothing to do with the either philological, racial, or ethnic, or cultural connotation. It really means a person who has reached a very high level of cultural and spiritual evolution. When I speak like this, you may ask me the question I'm trying to, is a kind of sophistry, polemical attempt to give a new meaning. The definition of Arya comes in one of the earliest lexicons in Sanskrit language, which was written in verses by Amarasimha. He incorporated the definitions of the word Aryan from earlier books which date back to 9th or 10th century BC. So taking those ideas, Amarasimha, who may have lived around 4th century AD, defines the word Arya as Mahakula Kulin Aryaka Sadbhya Sajjana Sadhavaka. This is the real definition of Arya. Mahakula Kulinaha, one who is born in a cultured, refined, educated, noble family. Not in terms of feudalistic, hierarchical terms, sense, but rather in the sense of being more cultured, refined, educated, noble-hearted, broad-minded, who looks upon others with love and compassion, who can look upon everything from the other man's point of view. That is a literal translation of a commentary that's written on Amarasimha's lexicon. Lexicon is called Amara Koshaka, means a dictionary written by the great lexicographer called Amarasimha. So Mahakula Kulin Aryaka. Arya is one who is born to a cultured, refined tradition. Sadbhya, highly refined, spiritually evolved, culturally elevated. And Sajjana means the one who never does or think anything evil, who always thinks and acts and speaks of good, noble and cultured ideas. Sadhavaka means Sajjanaha, means people who are always pursuing a great, noble goal in their life. This is the real meaning of the word Arya in Sanskrit. So in the old Sanskrit dramas, like Kadambari, Kalidasa's important plays which are being translated in English and German and different languages during the last almost 80 years, many of Kalidasa's plays have been translated into different European languages. There, whenever a person addresses a great wise man, sage or saint, he uses the word Arya or Aryaputraka, means O noble-hearted or wise or broad-minded or civilized, spiritually evolved. So, Vedas constitute the most ancient and most authentic cultural and spiritual and philosophical testimony of the Aryan race. Now, I shall give this lecture may have to be a bit of a torture for many of those who may not be interested in dry academic ideas, but I have to inflict them upon you, whether you like it or not, because this is a very, very serious topic. The word Aryan culture, the Vedas, all these need some very serious attention and interpretation in modern times, because the culture of the Aryans, the culture of the Vedas belongs to the whole humanity, not to Hinduism or India or Vedanta society. It is the common cultural and spiritual treasure of the whole mankind, humanity. So I shall try to give some technical explanations of the word Veda from its etymological and from its philological points of view. In Sanskrit, there are different roots. Every noun and verb comes from a root, more or less like Latin. So in the case of Vedas, there is one root which is called Vijnane. Vid means is a root, its meaning is knowledge, the supreme spiritual knowledge. So, and there are some suffixes added, Greek suffix. So, in other words, to be very brief, the word Veda comes from the root, from the verbal root vid, which means jnanam or knowledge or supreme spiritual wisdom. So in that sense, Bible could be described, can be called the Vedas of the Christians. The Tripitakas could be called the Vedas of the Buddhists, and so on. Another meaning is with Sattaya, with also, that particular root also means, it implies existence with capital letter E. Being with the capital letter B. The entire human, not only human, the whole existence, with or knowledge is what gives a sense of existence to everything. When we say, but I know that, it only means I know, I'm aware of its existence. Then there are different meanings. It also could mean Veda is that which gives us the supreme spiritual knowledge. So it could mean knowledge itself. It could mean as something which gives us this supreme knowledge. And also, it also implies the very concept of existence. So these are the different meanings of the word Veda. To give an example, to give a brief glimpse of the Vedic way of life, of the values that were pursued and implemented in their life by the ancient Vedic sages. I can quote, in fact, it's a kind of repetition from a convocation address that used to be given to students after their education, after they were imparted the Vedic education. When they left the college means ancient hermitages where students used to gather from different places, the entire Indian subcontinent. They used to come to these forest hermitages to undergo education for 12 years. When you talk about the period in which this Vedic educational tradition prevailed, you have to think of the entire Indian subcontinent, especially Pakistan and Afghanistan, and also some parts of the Central Asia used to be some very important parts of Indian subcontinent where Vedic tradition, Vedic culture prevailed. Places like Kabul, it's called Gandhara Desh, I mentioned in the Upanishadic Vedic tradition, and many places in today's Pakistan were all integral part of what could be called the cradle of Vedic civilization of ancient times. So the convocation address begins like this. Vedam anuchya acharya andevasinam anishaste satyam vada dharmam chara satyana paramadidavyam dharmana paramadidavyam madrudevo bhava pidrudevo bhava acharya devo bhava aditi devo bhava yani anavadyani karmani tani sevidavyani no idarani yani asmakam sujadridani tani sevidavyani no idarani. Just the first paragraph of the instruction is a kind of a convocation address which children, now of course by the time they would have reached almost their 21st year, after the completion of 12 years of Vedic education, they used to be given a lot of instruction by the teachers when they departed towards their homes to start their life as family members, just before marriage. The first instruction is, you should speak the truth, you should never deviate from the truth. You should practice dharma, you should never deviate from the path of dharma. And you should respect and honor the teacher and also the guest who comes to your home as God himself. Guest here means, you'll be surprised if you invite a person after paying the airfare up and down, plus $3,000 or $20,000 as lecture fees, you will naturally be forced to give a very good red carpet reception. But here, Aditi is the word used, Aditi Devo Bhava. Aditi means a person who happens to visit your home uninvited. People who are wandering from place to place, you have to think of a lifestyle of social life around 4000 BC. So in those days, people used to travel from place to place. They needed shelter, food, and protection, maybe from wild animals, from inclement weather. So whenever somebody visits your home, you should respect him, honor him, as much as you honor God himself. This kind of translation. That gives you a glimpse of the Vedic concept of family life and social life. And then again the teacher says, after undergoing instruction for a long time, when the student departs from their school, the teacher tells him or tells her, remember, tells her, this is very important. During the Vedic times, women education was widespread. It was almost compulsory. I can just quote from one ancient Vedic text which tells, Pura kalpeshu narinam maunji bandhanam ishyate adhyapanam cha vedanam. Nari means women. In ancient times, all girls used to be formally initiated into Vedic education, which is called Upanayana Kriya, the ceremony of initiation into Vedic education. And they used to be given systematic Vedic training and education in those days. So, after undergoing this instruction, the teacher tells the student, now you have stayed here. Mind you, the teachers used to provide free food and lodging and education to students. It was considered to be a great sin to sell food and information, knowledge. Annam vidya. Annam means food. It could also mean anything that is needed for your subsistence. Vidya means knowledge. A person who sells, who takes money in return for food, for giving food and for giving education, was a sinner. That was the concept. So after this education, the teacher tells, if you found anything noble, worth emulating, you can keep that in mind. And whatever you found noble and worth emulation, you should imitate, you can imbibe from us. Whatever you found not worth imitating or not worth learning, you need not do that. After all this education, full freedom was given to the students to practice whatever they were taught in the Vedic school. Now, one thing you will be surprised to know. Today, you hear about and you do practice temples, worships, pujas, images. If you go to India today, you find huge, gigantic temples, some of them several thousand feet tall, with tall towers, especially in southern parts. Not in northern parts of India, many of these ancient temples were destroyed by the invaders from time to time. And you find huge temples, elaborate systems of worship. In the Vedic times, there was no temple and no image worship. In the entire Vedic literature, you never come across any idea of a huge temple where people used to go to big temples and perform puja. No. In Vedic times, fire sacrifice took the place of temples and image worship. Fire was looked upon as a great symbol. Even today you find some of the remnant of the old Zoroastrian religion who had migrated from Iran practicing some kind of fire worship. In fact, they culturally belong to a sub-branch of Vedic social tradition. So this fire was called Agni. So the most ancient and the most important of the four Vedas is Rig Veda. There are four Vedas: Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Samaveda, and Atharva Veda. And each of these Vedas has got four branches. One part dealing with rituals, the other part dealing with hymns, songs in praise of different deities. It's called devas, gods and goddesses. Another one dealing with the method of performing Vedic sacrifices. And the fourth one dealing with the Upanishads, which finally constituted the fundamental works, canonical literature of the Vedanta philosophy. Now, the earliest portion is the Samhita portion, which is called that part of Vedas which contains great devotional hymns in praise of different deities. And the oldest of these four Vedas is Rig Veda, and the most important and the biggest as well. And of this Rig Veda, the earliest portion is Rig Veda Samhita. In other words, this happens to be the earliest, the most ancient record of human aspiration for higher life, spiritual life. And of this part, the first verse is a hymn, a song in praise of God manifesting as the fire principle, which is called Agni. So in the puja functions here, some of you must have seen this fire sacrifice. It is a remote and distant hangover of this ancient tradition of worshipping the omnipresent, the immanent, the transcendental reality as light of fire, which reveals everything, which is the essence of knowledge, which is the symbol of spiritual wisdom. So that fire was called Agni. And the first verse, in other words, we can say the first human aspiration, or the verse in metrical form which describes the first human aspiration for higher life, spiritual life, is a hymn in praise of Agni, or the fire god. Agni mele purohidam yajnasya devam murtijam hotaram viratnadhatamam. This is the first mantra, and this is systematically chanted whenever we worship puja. Even today, when we worship puja here in this temple, we still recite that word, that hymn, which happens to be the first attempt on the part of human beings to reach the spiritual. Now, this Agni is explained from different angles. Agni agranir bhavati. This is one definition given by a great etymologist and lexicographer. His name is Yaska, who lived almost in 8th century BC. So those of you, especially in English language, should keep in mind the first attempt to standardize modern King's English or Queen's English, depending upon how you look at it, was made in the beginning of 20th century. Fowler, Hornby, and others. At the phonetic level, the first attempt was made by Daniel Jones. of this side of the great dam, we don't care for it. In America, the first systematic attempt perhaps was made by Neo Chomsky, almost maybe 50 years back. But in Vedic language, the first attempt to systematically analyze language was made in 9th and 8th century BC. I am now quoting a definition given by Yaska in his etymological work called Niruktam, in which he defines Agni, the first human symbol, the first symbol of the transcendental reality, as Agranir Bhavadi, the one who walks in front of you, which means the one who leads you to spiritual knowledge. So when we put offerings in the fire, in fire sacrifice, the fire principle acts as an intermediary, as a vehicle to take our offerings to God. And the second one is Agram Yajneshu Praniyate, Agrani Bhavati, the one who is prominent in receiving yajnas. There are different definitions. Angam Nayadi Sannamanaha, which means the one who comes to us to accept our offerings and take us to higher levels of spiritual evolution. Agaknopano Bhavati means the one who breaks our bondage and takes us to the state of liberation. And then again, the one who kindles the light of knowledge within us. There are different definitions for the word Agni. So two important concepts we must remember when we talk about the Vedic culture and Vedic way of life. One is Agni, because in Vedic times there were no temples, no image worship. Every day morning and evening, in some traditions, they used to perform fire sacrifice. That was the way of meditating or connecting with God. After fire sacrifice, they will sit in front of the fire and meditate. And these meditative techniques were called upasanas, which are still being preserved in some places. The second concept in Vedic culture was yajna. So these are two things you have to remember. After explaining this, I will just give you certain examples from Vedic life, from day-to-day life situations, Vedic times. So first principle is Agni, second one is Yajna. All these great fire sacrifices were performed by married people, by all householders. In this connection, I must take you to some other important aspects of Vedic life before explaining Yajna. In Vedic times, they had four fundamental values of life. It's called Dharma, Artha, Kama and Moksha. Dharma is the fundamental ethical principle. Based on Dharma, it can be called the totality or the essence of all humanly conceivable moral and ethical ideas. Based on Dharma, we can pursue the path of fulfilling our desires, secular values, secular pleasures, worldly pleasures were not shunned or negated in Vedic tradition. Sometimes there was an attempt for some time, for some years, to interpret Vedic way of life as a kind of total negation of the empirical realities, worldly realities. No. Vedic way of life prepared man to lead a very integrated and complete and full life. People were allowed to pursue the path of wealth, pleasures, which are natural for people living in society, especially for householders. There is nothing wrong in it. But while pursuing the path of wealth and pleasures to fulfill their desires, they should not deviate from the path of dharma. When we live a very disciplined life, performing all worldly duties and responsibilities, without deviating from the path of dharma, we reach a point when we realize there is something beyond enjoying worldly pleasures, worldly enjoyments. And then we think of what happens after death. Is this life just a mechanical journey that begins at the cradle, ending with a piece of stone in the cremation ground? Is there nothing beyond that? But this question will emerge only if we live a life based on the values of dharma, the principles of dharma. And then we start thinking of what lies beyond. In the Kathopanishad, there is an interesting episode. A boy asks his teacher one question: what happens after death? Edam pede, yeyam prede vijigitsa manushi asti tige nayam asti dichaige, edad vidya manusishtastoyaham varana mesha varastrudiyah. This is the Sanskrit verse. The meaning is this: this boy was permitted to ask for 3 boons by his teacher, who was a supernatural being, Yama. He asked for 2 boons, all related to life in this world and also continued enjoyment of worldly pleasures in heaven. So, at last, the 3rd boon that he asked was, what happens to a person after he dies? Is there something that's left after one's death? Or is death the end of everything? In response to this question, his teacher explained the fundamental principles of spiritual life. So, dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. First, the fundamental moral principles. Based on that, the pursuit of wealth and fulfillment of desires, and finally, the higher transcendental value, liberation, moksha. Now, this path, consisting of 4 values, was followed in social and individual life with the help of 2 methods. One was, it's common to all. Everyone should start with education, brahmacharya asrama, 4 levels of 4 levels in the evolution of human life. That was meant for all. In a way, it deals with individual evolution, a person's obligation to himself and also to society and also to the family members. The first one is, first of all, a person should go and learn Vedas, learn the fundamental values of life, and after that, he should settle down in society as a family man. And when he grows old, he should retire to a lonely place to spend the rest of his lifetime in meditation and contemplation, which is called Vanaprasthasrama. So Brahmacharyasrama was the first one. During that stage, one was supposed to undergo education. In the convocation address that I quoted, the instruction is meant for a person who had completed his education and is going back to his home to start his life as a family member before he enters married life. And after he has ensured the continuity of family lineage. He should not stay in his home. They should retire to a forest hermitage, spending the rest of their lifetime in meditation and contemplation. What a contrast to what we find today. If you go to some old age homes, you find people who are 70, 80, 85 years old watching Terminator 1, 2, 3, 4 and 49ers all this football. See what a terrible tragedy. And finally, they breathe their last with a curse in their lips and total darkness in their hearts. But in Vedic way of life, those who have completed, those who have fulfilled their obligations in family life, they should retire to a place, husband and wife, and they should spend the rest of their lifetime in meditation and contemplation. In fact, there is a verse in the old constitution. There was a great lawgiver, his name was Manu, who wrote his Manu Smriti, which is a kind of a constitution where he makes it clear, Grihastatu yada pasid vali paridam atmanaka apatyasya apatyam tada aranyam samasayet. This is a Sanskrit verse. The meaning is this. An householder, when he sees the face of his grandson or maybe granddaughter, and when he finds that his hair has gone completely grey, instead of trying to get back his youth by going to blackening his hair and whitening his teeth, what he should do, he should retire to a forest hermitage with his wife and spend his lifetime in contemplation and meditation. In modern times, it may not be possible, but we can perhaps convert every old age home into a forest hermitage where aged people can spend their lifetime in peace and tranquility so that they can leave this world without misery, with a blessed attitude, peace and tranquility within their mind. And the last ashrama, that was called sannyasa ashrama. That is not meant for all, but those who are spiritually confident and those who felt themselves to be spiritually elevated enough can take to the life of a mendicant. The other important social institution that was the backbone of Vedic life was what's called Chadurvarnyam. So you have to remember the four fundamental values which are called Purushartha in Sanskrit. The second one I mentioned is a social institution or family institution in Vedic times. It is called Chadurasrama, Brahmacharyasrama, Garhastya, Vanaprastha Sannyasa, studentship, householdership, then the state of contemplation and meditation in forest hermitages. Finally, one takes to a life of mendicant. The third institution was, and that's very important, the Chadurvarnyam, 4 levels of human spiritual evolution. Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra. It deals with one's own spiritual evolution. That is individual obligation to society. Those who are spiritually fit and qualified can spend their lifetime completely devoted to meditation, contemplation, study of higher scriptures. And those who had to work in society, playing different roles in service of social obligations, the king and country, they can join the army. They are called Kshatriyas. The first one were called Brahmana, Kshatriyas. And then there were some people who were involved in trade and in agriculture. They were called Vaishyas. And fourth group was the group of people who were interested in service activities. This division was based on a kind of division of labor, the principle of division of labor. In the same family, you find a Brahmana who was devoted to meditation, contemplation. So in a family, if you find one boy or one boy spends most of his time maybe coming to Vedanta society or the church or a synagogue, meditating, contemplation, you should not force him to start a shop, to become a trader. Because he is born with that tendency. He will excel in that area. A person who is a natural instinctive interest in finance or commercial activities should not be forced to spend his lifetime in meditation. But at the same time, Vedas provided that all these can be integrated, combined in the life of a single individual. Every individual can combine all these qualities. Contemplation, meditation of the Brahmanas, activism of Kshatriyas, and common sense and the daily commercial obligations of Vaishyas, and also service activities of Shudras. These are 4 important institutions in Vedic times. I shall just, to give you an idea of what I stated earlier, the place of women folk in Vedic times. So you'll be surprised to know, because this is very often totally overlooked by many anthropologists and sociologists. You have to think of a society around 4th millennium BC. Of course, Max Muller's concepts of the antiquity of Vedic tradition is now no more fully accepted. Further investigations in history and Vedic Indology have confirmed that the early Vedic period must have been anywhere between 3500 or 4000 BC. Now, there is a very interesting episode which I'm quoting, which I'm just not quoting, but just referring to an episode in a book called Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. It comes in the 2nd chapter, 4th section. There's a great sage in ancient Vedic times. His name is Yajnavalkya. And one day, he told his wife, mind you, he's an aged householder. So he said, well, now I want to live the rest of my lifetime in complete contemplation and meditation. So he tells his wife, and he says, now I shall hand over to you all my property, bank balance, everything. Now this lady, her name is Maitreyi. She's well versed in Vedas. So Yajnavalkya says, Sahovacha Maitreyi yen ma yam bhago sarva prithivi vittena purnasyat katham tena amrutasyamiti. See, these are Maitreyi's words. She just makes an important statement to her husband. You said, you are going to give me all your wealth, a portion of it. Now, suppose I get all this wealth, all this property. Does it make me immortal? In what way do you think your property will make me contented? In what way will it give me immortality? Wealth will come and go. But what am I going to gain by all this wealth? Now, to remember, this question was asked by Maitreyi not out of a kind of bitterness. She was perfectly contented. She is actually engaging her husband in a prolonged philosophical dialogue which forms one of the most celebrated portions of the entire Vedic literature. The lady is not eager for wealth and she is very happy, but she asks one question: in what way is this wealth going to enrich me? Is it going to make me immortal? I look around and I see all these rich men and women. They are not very happy or contented just because they are rich and wealthy. So, In what way is it going to help me? Then Yajnavalkya replies, I quoted now, Saho vaja maitreyi yennuma iyam bhago sarva prithvi vittayena purnasyan katham tena amrudasyamiti. So, then Maitreyi asked the question. Yajnavalkya said, this wealth is not going to make you immortal. Now, Maitreyi asks, please teach me that knowledge instead of all the wealth, all the property. Teach me that knowledge, which is the highest wealth, that will make me immortal. In response to this, Yajnavalkya opens a very important dialogue which constitutes one of the most celebrated portions of Brihadaranyaka, which comes in the Yajurveda. And it contains the highest Vedanta philosophy. So you can see such a high Vedanta philosophy is expounded in a dialogue between a husband and wife. The meaning is this: when you reach a stage of spiritual evolution, when you feel yourself unified with the entire cosmic existence, when you feel you are non-different from the all-pervading consciousness, which is immanent, transcendental, and also immortal and all-pervading, then you don't see anything other than yourself. You feel yourself one with the entire humanity. So you don't see the other. This highest state of spiritual experience alone can make you immortal, not the wealth that I'm going to give you. This is just one flashlight into Vedic life. Another one I will quote and then I shall conclude. This is somewhat a little different. Here, there's a dialogue between a great woman philosopher of ancient Vedic times. Her name was Gargi Vachaknavi. She was as great as any of the greatest Brahmin philosophers and teachers of ancient Vedic times. And in those days, there used to be dialogues on high metaphysical, spiritual subjects between great scholars and philosophers. Many of these dialogues were held in the courts of kings and emperors. One of the greatest kings of those days was Janaka. And at the beginning of this Upanishad, it is stated, great scholars and philosophers and spiritual teachers used to come from all over the world to assemble in the presence of King Janaka, one of the greatest kings of those days, and discuss the highest metaphysical truths. You have to remember, this was long before Socrates started discussing things with Plato, Xenophon and others in Greece, long before Heraclitus and Pythagoras or Thales started thinking about what lies beyond this empirical world. All these dialogues took place at least 3,500 years before Pythagoras or Thales, who lived in 7th century, 6th century BC. The dialogue begins like this, opens. Athaha vajaknavi uvacha brahmanaha bhagavanto hantahamimam do prasno prakshyami tau chenme vakshati navai jadu yushmakamimam kaschit brahmodyam jetiti pritchagargiti. So, this lady, quite a formidable type of person, she was such a great scholar, a philosopher, and she's coming here to the court of Janaka in the presence of hundreds and hundreds of scholars and philosophers to challenge the greatest philosopher of that time. He was Yajnavalkya. And the Yajnavalkya, mind you, one of the most celebrated philosophers of ancient Vedic times, who is himself the author of Vajasneyi Samhita, one of the sub-branches of Yajurveda tradition, to which Brihadaranyaka Upanishad belongs. And she asked a question, mind you. Sahovacha aham vaitva yajnavalkya yatha Kashyapo va Vaideho va Ugraputro va Yujyam Dhanurijyam Krutva do Banavantu, etc. The long discussion. The essence is this. Look here, Yajnavalkya. I am going to ask you two questions. And you know why I am standing in front of you? I am standing in front of you as a mighty archer. So, the king of Kashi, Benares, of our times, was a mighty archer of those days. So the lady compares herself to a mighty archer with two sharp arrows ready to shoot at the great philosopher Yajnavalkya. Mean two great questions. Unless you answer these questions of mine, you can't claim to be the great teacher that many people mistake you to be. And she doesn't mince words. She means what she says. The dialogue which takes place later will reveal. Those who are interested, I have no time to explain all this right now. That is, it comes in the 3rd chapter of Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, 8th Brahmana, 8th section. Okay, now, what are her questions? Her questions is this. What pervades this absolute reality? What is above heaven? What is below earth? And again, what pervades the entire universe? What is the ultimate reality which is responsible for the existence of the world, the way it exists? And all these questions she says, and Yajnavalkya gives a long description of Atman, or the all-pervading, transcendental, omnipresent, immanent reality, which is the only absolute reality in existence, knowing which one becomes aware of, knowledgeable of everything. And then Yajnavalkya answers, Edasiva aksharasya prashasane gargi surya chandramaso vidrudo dishtadaha Edasiva aksharasya prashasane gargi dyava prithivyo vidrude dishtadaha, etc. The meaning is this. I have explained to you this absolute truth, this spiritual truth, the truth about Brahman or Atman of the consciousness, which is immanent in all human beings, not only human, in the entire existence, immanent, the indweller, which is all-pervading, omnipresent and transcendental reality, which never perishes because there was no time when it did not exist. It's beyond existence, beyond non-existence. If you say it is existence in the ordinary relative sense, it means it came into existence. So it was an existence because it always existed, not in the relative sense. All this he explains. So under the rule of this absolute reality, Gargi, the sun and moon are held in their own courses. Under the rule of this very absolute Gargi, heaven and earth hold their positions. Under the rule of this absolute reality, times, months, weeks, the sunrise, the sunset, the stars, the galaxies, Milky Ways, all these exist because of this absolute reality. There is something beyond the visible, beyond the empirical, beyond what is seen. And that is the only absolute reality, which is Atman, which is all-pervading, which is present everywhere in everything. So, when she got this reply, she became contented. She was testing Yajnavalkya. What I want to tell you is, Vedic culture was in many ways much more sublime, much more elevated, much more refined than the culture that we are experiencing today in this 21st century. The highest philosophical, spiritual truths were discussed, never enforced or imposed upon anybody. Discussed with so much of vigor and freedom of expression among hundreds of philosophers, and many of them women philosophers, in the presence of kings, in the presence of wise men. So, on the one hand, you can see the 4 fundamental values, Purusharthas. On the other hand, you can see 4 levels of individual evolution, and again 4 levels of evolution of life. From studentship to householdership, then retirement, contemplation, meditation, and finally mendicancy or liberation. Again, based upon human aptitudes and temperaments, one can take to the life of contemplation or meditation or religious, spiritual pursuits, again action or engagements related to life in this world. So, Vedic way of life was free on the one hand, at the same time very rational, very cosmopolitan. It was a kind of spiritual democracy. In a nutshell, we can say the Vedic way of life is a kind of spiritual egalitarianism. Thank you. Namaskar.